Hello everybody and welcome back to Michiana Mainlines. Today we're going to be taking our look back on the history of the South Bend secondary between South Bend and Niles, Michigan. We're going to end up doing this in 3 parts because there's just too much to talk about here and too many pictures. So we'll get started here and take a look at our main map here once again. Of course, you're down at the bottom. We had the Chicago main line through South Bend. Up here towards the top at Niles, we have the Amtrak line. And we're going to be working today just north of Notre Dame and up to about the Highway 12 corridor. Looking at some pictures and maps and such, we see quite a few spurs here. We had a Big C spur, we had a runaround track and some business on the north side of South Bend around the Darden Road area, and then up across the state line we had quite a bit of business around Falkerson Road. We had Niles Packaging, and then up around the Highway 12 area we had some activity there with the Scheller Globe plant. So we're going to kind of just jump right in here and start taking a look around. And let's see, first up we have just north of Notre Dame. This is the, let's see if we can get this a little bigger. I guess that's about all we can do. This is kind of a look at what the track looked like. This was just north of St. Mary's Switch. Over to the left we see the St. Mary's lead, which went to their power plant, and then we have the South Bend secondary, the line we will be looking at, looking up north toward Niles. This bridge that we see here, there was a question about that. That was the Indiana Toll Road exit entrance ramp that used to cross this line by a bridge, and because of it there was also a bridge that went across US 31 or 933. But when this line was abandoned, there was no longer any need to have that, so the bridges were taken down, and now we have the entrance exit at ground level, which is the way things are now. But this is kind of what the track looked like back in the late 80s period, maybe around 90. And as you can see, not in the best shape of track. So let's go ahead and bring up another here now. This is a little bit farther north in Roseland. This is just south of Pendle Street, and this was in the early 80s. Well, probably actually more of mid 80s, probably maybe 84, 85 I would suspect. This was the Conrail local out of South Bend that was taking some loads up to the Big C lumber, which you can kind of see part of their complex here. We'll get a better look at that. Normally what they would do is just back down from South Bend, sometimes having a caboose on the end, and just back all the way to Big C. And they also would sometimes have cars for the old juries complex. And this is how they did it out of South Bend. Here you get a good look at what that track was like. Not in all the best of shape. I mean, kind of neat really that it was still being used, but I mean you can really see there's not that much of a roadbed left of this anymore, of what used to kind of be a main line between South Bend and Niles. So let's continue here now. This is a closer look at the Big C dock, Pendle Street. Again, a couple boxcars that were spotted there at the platform. You can still see that platform today if you hike or ride on that bike trail. It's still there, but of course, you know, the track is all gone now. They received boxcars, probably lumber I would imagine, and sometimes they would get an actual lumber car. So that's kind of what that looked like. Let's take some more looks here in this area. This was probably after service had stopped. I suspect this might have been late 80s or maybe early 90s. This was kind of the same area. Looking south, you see the bridge for the toll road entrance down there. That's looking straight south. Let's take another shot here. Again, same location, looking the other way with a good look at the Big C switch. Like I say, I think this might have been when service had already stopped or was pretty close to it. I think what happened here was I think Big C started getting their loads up at their facility up in Granger, which was served by the Grand Trunk Canadian National, and I think that's when service stopped here, because already even when they were coming into Big C, they weren't going any farther north. This track was pretty much out north of here. So let's see here. Now we get a look at Cleveland Road. Now this is kind of a iconic picture here. Of course, John Strombeck, the Strombeck brothers took a good number of shots from the local area in the 60s and even in the 70s, and they really covered a lot of this area, which is good, because these are areas that I don't have anything for. Luckily, I got pictures and video for the area south of here, but this was when Penn Central was still operating the line. 1974, yep, the later years of Penn Central, because Conrail, of course, took over on April 1st of 1976. But just a great shot of how the trains used to run between Niles and South Bend. And now for fun, we can kind of take a look at a current view of what that looks like here now. Same crossing area with a different kind of crossing signals. Of course, the Indiana Michigan River Valley bike trail and hiking trail, and it's kind of funny in a way because it's kind of a memorial. I always think of this crosswalk as kind of being a memorial to the railroad track, and it's funny because if anybody was glad that the railroad was gone, because they didn't have to get stopped by trains anymore on Cleveland Road, well, they're getting stopped a lot more by a different type of traffic. So just kind of a neat look at what that area looks like now. But we will continue to move northward. This was kind of a look at Darden Road. This was looking south. This was when the rail was just being removed. I believe this was sometime in the early 90s. Early to mid 90s, I'm thinking, because as we'll talk a little bit more later, it's kind of uncertain of when this thing was actually abandoned. There are some publications that say 1984, but the publication that I pretty much rely on says 1993, and I kind of lean toward that one a little bit more because, again, the track really wasn't removed until later, and as we'll see later too, there's a map that actually shows this line still kind of being listed for freight service in the late 80s. So I kind of don't agree with that 84 figure. Now it could possibly be that abandonment was granted but never consummated. I don't know, but anyway, this is what it looked like, and here you can see at this time it was just a sod track. There was no road bed whatsoever, and I mean pretty much just grass and weeds. But this was rail being removed at Darden Road. So now we will take a look here. This is a current shot just north of Darden Road, just north of Christ the King School, and this is the back end of Midland Engineering. Those doors kind of look to me what were probably boxcar loading doors. There was definitely business here that took freight between Darden Road and Brick Road. I've seen different maps. I've seen some showing that there was actually a complete runaround passing siding here, and I've seen others that just showed a couple spurs, but there definitely was freight business here, and I think this is evidence of it. I think those were boxcar loading doors. Perhaps somebody knows for sure and can shed some light on that, but I think this is still a little bit of what remains of history that we're seeing here. But we continue. Here we have a shot. I just found out about this one lately. This was a Tim Vermandi. I hope I'm pronouncing that name right. Vermandi. A shot at Aunton Road of a New York Central locomotive. And I know Aunton Road did have signals, so that really does look good to me as an Aunton Road. I believe they said the period was sometime in the 60s, which New York Central, that would make sense because Penn Central took over in about 1968. So this probably would have still been under the New York Central ownership at this time. But it's good that we have shots like this because we at least have some preservation of the history of this line. So we will move on. Let's see what we got up here next. Okay, here's another iconic Strombeck photo. This was the Adams Road area looking north. Palisades, that was a station at the time. You actually see here one of the train order posts where the engineer would reach out and grab the train orders. So I don't know if there was any business in this location. I'm not aware of any, but it was definitely a station stop, as was Bertrand, which is farther north up in Michigan, which I believe there was a sighting or something. But of course now this is the bike trail route, and even here you can see, I don't know if I have the date on this or not. Let's see if I can find that real quickly. 1974, August of 74. This was Jeff Strombeck's photo, and definitely Penn Central operation at that time. And here you get a good look at kind of what that track looked like. I mean, again, just really no road bed at that time even to speak of, just pretty much grass grown. They must have done some brush cutting, or there would have been much higher growth, but I mean not an awful lot. So just an interesting shot of what it looked like back then. There is one of these side streets here is named Palisade, so probably named after this being a station stop. And I should mention too, the Northern Indiana electric rail line also paralleled this route all the way up to Niles, just to the east of this line, from what I can determine. In fact, that kind of makes it difficult when you try to trace this route between Niles and South Bend. It's easy to, of course, a lot of the grades now have been completely obliterated anyway, but where you can still see some evidences, it's hard to say which right of way you're really looking at. But I believe that was abandoned back in the 30s, so I mean what pretty much was left was the freight line, which is what we're dealing with in these videos. So let us continue farther up north. That's about all we have of actual train pictures, but we've still got other stuff here to talk about. We get up into Michigan now in the Falkerson Road area. That's where there was some business. In fact, before I show that, I need to show this ZTS map. Let's bring up a trusty ZTS map here and take a look at this area. This now is in Michigan. Falkerson Road here. Here we have east and westbound Highway 12. But concentrating on Falkerson, we see there was some activity in this area here for sure. We did have another sighting that crossed Falkerson. That was the old Niles Packaging building. And we can take a quick look at that right now. Let's see, where's that at? Here is the... here's kind of what that looked like. This is a current shot here showing that old building. I think it's vacant now. I don't know if Niles Packaging went out of business or if they're in a new location, but you can kind of see that fenced in area, and you can't see it in this shot, but there was a boxcar door, and this is where that sighting ran into the building there. So if you didn't know to look for it, I mean you wouldn't even notice that a rail line crossed here. But that's a look at that. Let's get back now to that ZTS map. Let's see if we can bring that up. It shows these two fuel spurs. One of these buildings was Koch Fuels, the other one was Citgo. And this map is dated April 1st of 87. Now I'm not sure if this was still serviced at that time. You would think that it would be if it was stated that way, but I'm not exactly sure when this stopped, because again, this kind of gets into these differences of the abandonment. Well, this couldn't have been abandoned in 84 if these were still active in 87. So that's what kind of tends to lean toward the abandonment being a little later, like the 93. I think the 93 is the better figure for abandonment for Niles South, at least south of US 12, because now when we get north of US 12, that was the last part of this whole line that was operated the longest. That did not end until close to 2000. And that was primarily for the French paper mill spur, which we'll see in the next video. But just getting back here quickly again to this Citgo and the Koch fuels. If we bring up the overhead satellite view here now, we can really see good evidence of this. Of course, here now down at the bottom is Falkerson Road. Here's this old Niles packaging that we just looked at, and kind of where that spur ran in. Now up here you'll see these two buildings. I'm not sure which of these was which in terms of, you know, who owned it back then and who owns it now, but you can really kind of see quite nicely here. I kind of laid in where this spur runs right in between these two buildings, and you can still see I didn't bother to save a street level of this, but you know, there's still the gravel of where that spur ran right in between these two buildings. And according to the map, there was another one that went off here to something else. You really can't see any sign of that here now, so it can't be too sure, but there were two spurs right in this area as well. And of course now the trail pretty much marks where the roughly where the line was. You can also see here a very straight treat area where the line went north. So that's kind of a little bit of remaining history that still gives a glimpse of what used to be here just north of Falkerson Road. And I remember that well. I remember going to the drive-in theater back in the late 70s, probably early 80s, and coming back down Falkerson Road, and you know, things were still, the signals were still there, you know, the line was still kind of in place, but you know, I wasn't paying attention at that time to know if it was really being used or not, so maybe somebody knows for sure. And let's see now, next what we need to do here. Well, I think we probably better dig in before we kind of close with the final stop here. We need to dig into the abandonment of this whole kit and caboodle. Last time we looked at the abandonment map of the MC connector in South Bend. Now we're going to look at the one which kind of just dealt with the South Bend secondary. I've kind of highlighted this here in yellow from Niles to South Bend. Again, these maps were, the important thing was category 1 and category 2. Category 1 was the anticipated abandonment or discontinuance, and category 2 was understudy and potential future. And like I mentioned in the last video, this entire segment between Niles and South Bend was just marked as potential, understudy. It was almost like they were kind of leaning that if they did keep service to South Bend, it would have been coming out of Niles. Of course, as we know, that did not happen, and this line did basically go dormant and then was abandoned in the 80s or early 90s, whichever figure you choose to believe. But you see here that the Benton Harbor to Niles, or the Benton secondary as it was called, was anticipated, and that was in fact abandoned for sure in the 80s. I believe in about the early 80s, because that was really a ramshackle. I think in the final years they even had a extra surcharge that Conrail was putting on any shipments to actually discourage any use of the line, so they could just get rid of it, and that's just what they did. We'll probably touch on that briefly in the next video. But this is kind of the way it all ended. And now, as I say, kind of give a little bit of a teaser here for the next video. We'll kind of look at the highway just north of the Highway 12 area. Highway 12 was just down here off of the shot, but this is where we get into the line that was operated the longest, almost to 2000. There was actually a passing sighting right here. In fact, I think you can kind of almost see it a little bit here. And up here we see the big curve of what was the lead to a French paper. We'll talk about that in the next one. And of course the street running and everything else. Here the Modenier plant, that used to be Scheller Globe. And I believe even before that it was Conrail. And they had a spur that curved in here. Can't really see any trace here of it, but they had a spur that I think went right into the building possibly, and then there was even another spur. And I'm not sure when service to that stopped, but I think that already ended when the French was still going on into the 90s, and then finally that stopped. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Like, subscribe, share this information with any of your friends or anybody that would be interested in a history of this. We may do more of these things because there still are more pictures and more stuff we can look at. But I am thinking for right now what I'm probably going to do is one of these for the south side of South Bend, dealing with some of that trackage there, including the old Pennsylvania, and possibly a E&W from Elkhart to Mishawaka, particularly that part which is now gone and no longer operated by the new operation. So anyway, thanks for watching. Have a good day. We'll see you with part 3.